What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. After my live stream last night, I thought I would make a short video discussing what I think the possible outcomes are for Brexit, given the EU's apparent U-turn yesterday that has allowed these treaty negotiations to start with a week left before the Benn Act or Surrender Bill comes into force on October 19th. That potentially requires Boris Johnson to request an extension no one but Parliament want. Now, this should be blatantly obvious to everyone, but I will say it anyway. That 1 week time frame these negotiators have left does not, and I repeat, does not leave enough time to change anything from the Theresa May surrender treaty that would make this new treaty worth the paper it's written on to anyone outside of some Ramonas in Parliament. It is physically impossible to change the withdrawal treaty and political declaration agreed by Maybot in 1 week, even if you are negotiating with a nation or union that is friendly to you and open to compromise. It's just not possible. And we all know the EU is not friendly to the UK and certainly not towards Boris Johnson. So there is absolutely no chance any treaty Boris can get back from Brussels is going to be real Brexit. He will at best get concessions in name only. Any treaty with the EU now is going to be Maybot 2.0. Which leads on to what I think will happen in the coming days, as there are really not many ways it can go from here. But it depends on Boris Johnson and his government's actual plans, and of course the plans of the Ramonin traitors in Parliament. The EU themselves are not really relevant in this discussion, since any treaty coming back from them is not going to be good for the UK. Because as we all know, they need us in the Union, paying them money to keep their heads above water. They won't and can't compromise on what's already been agreed before Boris Johnson was even Prime Minister. The EU needs the Maybot Surrender Treaty in place just to be able to continue existing financially, and so it can form its European army, it would seem. The European Union is in decline, Germany looks almost certain to enter recession soon, and others are likely to join them, so it cannot afford to lose the Bank of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We are keeping these fat cats in butlers and fancy cars, so they will be hostile to any negotiation that wants to take us out, and as such, we should expect no help from them, as recent months have shown, and of course the Lib Dems and Speaker of Remain John Bercont's collusion with the EU Commission. The EU will do what they do. Really, this all depends on what Boris Johnson and Parliament intends to do in regards to this possible treaty that Boris Johnson will come back with. If the EU agree to it, of course. At the end of the day, we all know the EU are working against us and using the border on the Republic of Ireland to do it. So we have to expect them to play hardball. That's why we can't really consider them in this. It all depends on what Boris Johnson is going to do and of course the response from Parliament, as they are actually the ones in control here. The way I see it, from the events over the last 48 hours, Boris Johnson is likely doing one of a few things. All of them are risky, not only for him, but for Brexit in general, but could either be a very cunning move or a complete sellout of the nation who voted in the 2016 referendum. Now, the progress on these negotiations could be genuine, and Boris could be trying to reword the Maybot Surrender Treaty with the EU so it seems more palatable to Parliament, in the hope he can pass it and keep his promise to deliver some form of Brexit by Halloween, essentially selling out Brexit and the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU. Because even Parliament unanimously agreed that the Maybot Surrender Treaty was not Brexit in any sense of the word, and was in fact such a shit deal, it essentially would have made us the vassal state of the EU. That fact, among many other things, including the backstop, is the reason why it was emphatically rejected 3 times by MPs in the Commons, forcing Theresa the EU appeaser to take the walk of shame, who I hope will forever be known as Britain's worst Prime Minister that tried to sell us out to a foreign entity and charge the UK taxpayer £39 billion for the privilege of being a vassal state. When her job was actually to take us out of the European Union, she decided she wanted to make us their bank and our armed forces their lackeys. Now, the only thing I have really heard coming out of these current talks seem to be involving Northern Ireland remaining in the customs union or single market, which some are claiming, in a way, leaves Northern Ireland as part of the European Union, which I would have to agree. Now, we don't have any idea what is actually going on, but Boris Johnson refused to deny outright that Northern Ireland wouldn't remain in the customs union, which is fueling the fears he is ready to sacrifice Northern Ireland. As bad as that actually sounds, it is entirely possible, as I said earlier, that Boris Johnson could be doing his best to get this deal through the House of Commons and actually want it to go through, in some mistaken belief that doing so will be considered Brexit and will win him the next election, with the majority he is looking to secure based on recent polls, which I have to say would be misguided, but is definitely possible. Boris Johnson is a politician after all, guys. 99% of them are compulsive liars and often think only of themselves. Very few are straight arrows, so the idea of them selling out the peasants like us should not be a shock to you. Now, if Boris Johnson is going down the first route, which we will call the sellout route, it will be risky for him. If it involves sacrificing Northern Ireland and Parliament passed his new treaty, he could well be one of the most hated Prime Ministers of all time. Not only by Brexiteers, but by a large section of the general public for agreeing to leave Northern Ireland in the EU. That would go down like a lead balloon, and his support, I'm sure, would plummet to the low 20s or high teens in the polls. He would have absolutely no chance of winning an election, so would have no choice but to step down. The Tory party would also likely be done for good. They are on thin ice with a lot of people after the Maybot government's antics. Boris has brought some goodwill back to them, but it could be completely obliterated if Brexit is in name only. I honestly can't see a way back from that if it occurs. It's also a risk because Parliament could reject the treaty and he would have to extend to try and get a better deal through Parliament, much like Maybot did when she was Prime Minister. Meaning all the Brexiteers would be extremely pissed off that he tried to pass a treaty like that and be seen to actually want it passed by agreeing to an extension to negotiate some more. He would be kissing bye-bye to the Tory majority that will come from the next election based on current polls, as I've said. If that is his plan, it's full of risks that could end the Tory party as a political force and put Labour in power while only delivering Brexit in name only, so we would still be in the EU. Of course, the other possibility coming from these talks, like I said in my live stream last night, is that Boris Johnson is asking for this treaty that is rumoured to annex Northern Ireland from the UK with the aim of getting it rejected by Parliament, possibly because he is hoping he can use that as an argument in court if he tries to ignore the surrender bill's extension requests, or extension law, whatever you want to call it. His defence in a court case like that could be something along the lines of Parliament did not pass the treaty that had been agreed with the European Union and this government, so it's the Ramona MP's fault we have no deal by the October 19th EU summit. Therefore, I should not have to ask for an extension because they are trying to block it. But if that argument fails or cannot be used for whatever reason, I am not a lawyer so I don't know, and Parliament does reject his deal, Boris Johnson does have one more option. He could turn around and say, well, Parliament is blocking Brexit and therefore trying to block what people voted for. So to protect democracy, I'm going to deliver a no-deal Brexit. Because there is a possibility, guys, that he could use the simple fact European law supersedes UK law in order to ignore the Ben Act and just take us out on October the 31st. Because Article 50 states we leave on October the 31st with or without a deal by EU law. And the Ben Act requires an extension to the Article 50 process only under UK law. So it should be possible to use EU law against it, since as I said, EU law supersedes UK law. That would not be something these Ramonas could take to the Scottish Court of Session or the Supreme Court. It's EU law, end of story. It would be a way he could get a no-deal Brexit through without looking like a bad guy. Since Parliament blocked his deal, a no-deal Brexit would be blamed on the Ramonas blocking his so-called deal in a future election by the Conservative Party, because they could all say, we tried to get a deal, Boris tried to get a deal, the EU actually agreed to it, and you lot all still rejected it, so no deal was the only option left. That would keep more people on side if he had no treaty agreed with the EU and just went for a no deal outright, because obviously not all Conservatives are Leave voters, guys. He needs Remainers to be on side with him also, because he wants, like I've said, that majority at the next election. He is playing the long game, guys. Either way, either decision he makes, he still wants to be elected again. He wants to win an election. He wants the mandate. He wants to shit on Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament at the dispatch box with a mandate so he can shut him down on absolutely anything he says. And of course, there is another situation that could stem from these treaty negotiations. We could end up with another delay for a general election if his treaty is rejected by Parliament or the EU. And Boris does not have the bollocks to or physically can't use EU law to supersede UK law and leave without a deal on Halloween. This option would involve a 3-month minimum extension for a general election or a 6-month plus extension for a referendum with 10 million postal votes for Remain, no doubt. The extension could well be longer than 6 months, but at least 6 months for a referendum is what is being speculated right now. This is always a possibility if the last 3 years are anything to go by. Now, as far as I can work out, and I could be wrong, they are the only ways this can really go, or variations of them. And what happens from now on will really depend on what Boris Johnson wants, and of course Parliament, providing the EU actually agree to a Boris Johnson treaty, which it looks likely they might actually do now. The question is, does Boris Johnson really want his new treaty to go through, if he actually gets one? Even though we all know it can only be the Maybot Surrender Treaty dressed up as a new surrender treaty due to the time frame issues I touched on earlier in the video. Or is he putting forward a deal that sacrifices Northern Ireland, counting on the fact Parliament is very likely to reject any deal Boris Johnson puts forward? Because they all suffer from not only severe Brexit derangement syndrome, but a far more vicious strain of Boris derangement syndrome than we ever imagined possible. If Boris Johnson's deal was to remain in the EU and give Labour dictatorship over this country, they would all vote against it because it's Boris Johnson's deal. They hate the man, not just the politics, remember. So it is possible that he could be banking on that fact to get it rejected by Parliament and use Article 50 to supersede the Benn Act, or use that somehow to argue in court that he got a deal with the EU that was good and Parliament rejected it because they are all Ramonin tossers, so it's not his fault and he should not have to request an extension, if that's even possible. Or finally, he might just request an extension and break his promise should Parliament reject his shitty deal. Because it will be shit, guys, let's be honest. I've said it, it's going to be a Maybot deal. I don't know about you guys, but I really can't see any other way for this to go, unless, of course, he has an ace up his sleeve and we don't know about it yet, and this is all just a ruse to keep the Ramonas off the scent. What do you guys think, though? Let me know what you think he's going to do, or what you think might happen next, down in the comments section below. Personally, I'm inclined to think Boris wants any deal to be rejected by Parliament. I can't imagine many of the team pulling the strings will be very happy with the Maybot deal, and least of all Dominic Cummings or Jacob Rees-Mogg, who have flat out shot it down many times before. I think he wants it to get rejected, or at least knows it will be rejected by Parliament, meaning he will leave on the 31st of October without a deal, possibly using Article 50 to override the Benn Act and leave without a deal on October the 31st if he does not have another plan to get Brexit through. I'm sure Boris Johnson knows the Maybot Treaty is not a real Brexit, and I would bet his team know the people of this country do not want any part of Maybot's deal for the same reasons. And if his interest is getting re-elected after Brexit, as we all know it is, I can't see him trying to destroy the support he currently has. So, in my opinion, I still think he doesn't want this deal to go through if he's rehashing the Maybot deal, which, to be honest, it can only be. Of course, though, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong. He could want an extension or to actually get this deal through and leave the EU in name only. He is a politician after all, guys. I would say though, each option discussed in this video, be it Boris Johnson selling us out, Boris wanting it to be rejected so he can blame Parliament and take us out anyway, or him wanting an extension or having one forced upon him, for example, all have equal chances of happening right now. The next few days might show one to be more likely, or some new unforeseen option could present itself, but as it stands, I would say they all have an equal chance of being correct at the moment. One of those 3 or 4 possible things, or variations of them, are likely what's going to happen, and likely what Boris Johnson wants to happen. Now, can things change? Of course they can. This is British politics in 2019. Anything's possible. Like I've said before, these days, nothing is certain except the fact that Ramonin traitors will do their best to stop a real Brexit if they can. So, let's hope they can't as we approach the end of October now. Well guys, I'm going to end the video there. I want to thank the channel's PayPal, Patreon and Subscribe Star members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
Parliament is a dead Parliament. Yes. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats, while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace. But they're too cowardly to give it a go. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.
And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.